Bible is often described as the most important book in human history. It's been translated into more languages than any other text. It's been printed more times than any other book. And for billions of people, it forms the foundation of morality, culture, and belief. But when you take a step back, strip away the reverence, and read it with the same attention you'd give any other book, something becomes clear. The Bible isn't one book. It's a collection of books, dozens of authors, writing over centuries, often with very different agendas, perspectives, and purposes. And once you understand that, a lot of things start to make sense, especially the contradictions. They're not small details, they're not typos, they're major, unavoidable inconsistencies that show up in key parts of the story. And once you start seeing them, you realize they're everywhere. Take the story of creation. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates light first, then sky, land, plants, sun, moon, animals, and finally humans, male and female, at the same time. But in the very next chapter, the order changes completely. Now man is created first, then plants, then animals, and finally woman, made from man's rib. That's not a minor difference. It's a completely different version of the beginning of the world told side by side, as if readers wouldn't notice. And it doesn't stop there. The flood story told through Noah also contains two versions blended together. In one part, Noah is told to bring 2 of every animal, but in another, just verses later, he's told to bring 7 pairs of clean animals and 1 pair of unclean. The 2 instructions sit right next to each other, contradicting each other, but both are included as if the editors never decided which one was right. Then there's the issue of God's nature. In some parts, he's described as loving, slow to anger, and full of mercy. But in other places, he demands genocide, orders the slaughter of children, and punishes entire generations for the mistakes of a few. One moment, he's blessing enemies. The next, he's destroying cities with fire and commanding armies to leave no survivors. This inconsistency isn't just confusing. It raises serious moral questions. Take Exodus, where God hardens Pharaoh's heart multiple times, just so he can send more plagues and demonstrate his power. It's written openly. Pharaoh wanted to let the people go, but God stepped in to make him refuse, and then punished him for it. That's not free will. That's not justice. That's manipulation. And if you look at the 10 Commandments, so often held up as the unshakable moral law, even those aren't as clear as people think. The version most people know is from Exodus 20. But there's another set, in Exodus 34, where the laws include things like not boiling a young goat in its mother's milk and observing the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That version ends with, "These are the 10 Commandments." But they don't match the first list at all. When it comes to Numbers, the contradictions multiply. In the book of Numbers, 25,000 people die in a plague. In the same story elsewhere, the count is 24,000. In 2 Samuel, God tells David to conduct a census, but in 1 Chronicles it says Satan told him to. Same event, same result, completely different source. Even the most central figure of the Bible, Jesus, comes with contradictions. The 4 Gospels don't agree on key events in his life. The genealogy of Jesus, listed in Matthew and Luke, doesn't match, not even close. Different names, different orders, different ancestors. The resurrection, arguably the most important moment in the New Testament, is told 4 different ways, with different women at the tomb, different angels, and different timelines for when Jesus appears to his followers. In Mark, the original ending doesn't even include any resurrection appearances. It ends with the women fleeing the tomb in fear and telling no one. Later versions added more to make it feel complete. But those additions came generations later. Then there's the issue of salvation. Is it by faith alone? Ephesians says yes. James says no. One says deeds don't matter, only belief. The other says belief without action is meaningless. These are not academic nitpicks. These are foundational beliefs. and the book that people rely on to define eternal truth can't even agree on them. And when people notice these contradictions, the usual response is to say they must be misunderstood, that there's a deeper meaning, that context explains everything. But often, that just means bending logic to fit a conclusion that was decided before the question was even asked. In any other context, law, science, history, this level of inconsistency would be a red flag. If a textbook contradicted itself every few pages, no one would trust it. If a witness in court changed their story 4 times, their testimony would be thrown out. But with the Bible, these contradictions are often ignored or explained away with layers of theology that most readers never actually find in the text itself. It's also important to see what the Bible leaves out. Whole groups of books were excluded from the final version, the so-called apocryphal texts, the Gnostic Gospels, the writings that didn't match the emerging doctrines of early church leaders. This wasn't divine inspiration, it was editing, politics, power struggles between factions. Over time, the version of the Bible we have today was shaped by councils, votes, and decisions made by men with very human goals. Some books were included to support certain ideas. Others were left out because they didn't fit the message. That's not revelation, that's curation. And still, many people believe this book holds absolute truth, even when it contradicts itself, even when its stories don't line up, even when its claims go against what we now know about the world. Genesis says the earth was created in 6 days, with light before the sun, with stars set in a dome above the earth, with all life formed before death existed. But geology, biology, astronomy, they all tell a different story, a more complex one, a more beautiful one, and one that didn't need to be invented to control or comfort. The contradictions go beyond the text. They're built into how the Bible is used. People quote it to support peace and war, mercy and violence, equality and hierarchy. Every position has a verse. Every agenda has a scripture. That's not clarity. That's license. And once you see that, the authority begins to unravel. People read the Bible because they're told it has answers. But many of those answers depend on which chapter you read, or which translation you use, or which preacher is interpreting it. That's not divine consistency. That's ambiguity dressed as truth. And yet, for so long this book has been treated as untouchable, beyond criticism, beyond question. But when you read it carefully, not as a believer, not as a skeptic, just as a reader, you see what it really is, a collection of ideas, stories, arguments, contradictions, written by people trying to make sense of the world, sometimes inspired, sometimes mistaken, always human. And it's in that human quality that things start to make more sense. When you see the Bible not as a perfect, unified message from a divine source, but as a patchwork of texts written by many people with different experiences, motives, and limitations, the contradictions stop being surprising. They become expected. Because that's what happens when dozens of authors try to explain life, death, morality, history, and the unknown. Across generations, some of them believed the world was flat, fixed under a dome. Some thought disease was caused by sin or evil spirits. Some promoted rules for a small tribal society. Others tried to universalize those ideas long after the context had changed. These aren't divine errors. They're human ones, reflections of the time and place in which they were written. But calling it divine, calling it perfect, puts those contradictions in a very different light, because then you have to ask, why would a perfect being communicate in such a confusing, self-conflicting way? Why use unclear stories, ancient language, metaphor stacked on metaphor, and then demand belief based on that unclear message? If you take that question seriously, it becomes hard to keep calling this book infallible. There's a deeper contradiction, too. The Bible is often called the Word of God, but nowhere in the Bible does God actually write it. It's always people writing, people speaking, people remembering. Sometimes they say God told them what to write. Other times they're writing songs, laws, letters, or history. But in every case, the words come through human hands. And human hands make mistakes. They misremember, they reinterpret, they revise. When we compare ancient manuscripts of the Bible, and there are thousands, we find that no two copies are exactly alike. Scribes added things, removed things, harmonized stories, or inserted ideas that weren't there before. This wasn't done with evil intent. It was part of how texts were passed down. But it matters. Because when people say the Bible is perfect, they usually haven't seen just how many versions there are. How many verses were added later, how many were disputed, how many don't appear in the earliest manuscripts. Mark 16's ending, the story of the woman caught in adultery in John 8, the references to the Trinity. All later additions, not original, not consistent, not divine fingerprints, but human editing. There's also the issue of prophecy. People often point to fulfilled prophecies in the Bible as proof of its truth, but when you read them closely, most are vague, symbolic, or retroactively applied. Some are clearly written after the events they supposedly predicted. Others are pulled out of context and forced into meaning something they never actually said. Take Isaiah 7:14, often cited as a prophecy of Jesus' virgin birth. But the original Hebrew doesn't say virgin, it says young woman. And in the original story, the verse wasn't about a distant Messiah. It was about a political situation unfolding at that time. Later writers reinterpreted it because they needed it to fit. This kind of reinterpretation happens a lot. When the text doesn't match the doctrine, the text is bent, it's spiritualized, rephrased, or ignored. One contradiction that rarely gets discussed is how the Bible handles knowledge itself. In some parts, it praises wisdom, study, reason. In others, it warns against asking too much, questioning authority, or trusting in human understanding. There's a tension between curiosity and obedience, and depending on the agenda of the teacher, one side gets emphasized over the other. That makes the Bible easy to weaponize. A verse can be pulled to defend almost anything, and it has been: slavery, war, misogyny, colonialism, capital punishment, and also abolition, peace, equality, and mercy. It's not that the Bible teaches one message, it teaches many, often at odds with each other, and that leaves the interpreter with power, not the text. Throughout history, different branches of Christianity have split over how to interpret this book. Catholic and Protestant, Orthodox and Evangelical, Pentecostal and Reformed, all using the same Bible, all claiming to be right, all reading it differently. That should tell us something, not just about the people, but about the book itself. If the message were clear, there wouldn't be 45,000 denominations. When you hold all this together, the contradictions, the textual issues, the conflicting ethics, the editing, the endless interpretations, you're left with a book that's deeply interesting, historically significant, and often poetic, but not reliable as a source of absolute truth. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the real problem isn't that the Bible is flawed, it's that so many people insist it isn't. That they build systems, laws, and personal identities on the idea that this one book, above all others, contains the unquestionable truth. That's a heavy burden to place on any book, let alone one filled with so many inconsistencies. It's one thing to read the Bible, it's another to claim that it's perfect, or that every word applies to every person in every situation forever. Because once you make that claim, you can't pick and choose. You can't quote the loving verses and ignore the violent ones. You can't point to one genealogy and dismiss the one that contradicts it. And yet, that's what happens over and over again. So maybe the honest thing to do is this: Read it the way we read anything else, thoughtfully, critically, with respect for what it is, not what we want it to be. A collection of voices, full of ideas, questions, stories, errors, and sometimes wisdom, but not divine instruction handed down from beyond time. And once you start reading it that way, it opens up in a different way, not as a sacred text, but as a human one.